They told me, you've got to be loud. It's the last morning. Let's get people awake. Thank you for that. Classic, classic. How was everybody's evening? Did you have a nice time last night? Yeah? I've got to give a shout out to, I'm going to probably get the name wrong, but it was a Virginia glass of wine, my first. It was an Emeritage, and I believe it was it Piedmont? Pearman. Are they here? Are you here? No, of course not. They were finishing that bottle as I left, but very enjoyable. Quick show of hands. Anybody get lost in the Marriott while they've been here these last few days? Okay, good. It wasn't just that I'd had too much of that wine on the way. I went completely the wrong floor in the wrong direction. Right, we are going to get going this morning with something a little bit different. It's a bit of an experiment. I'm up here with Corie, who you remember from yesterday's panel. And we're going to be trying something that we've actually never done before. So if it goes wrong, bear with us. But we're going to do something that's a little bit game show-like. We're going to have 8 presenters. We're going to ask them one question each to come up with an answer. And we're going to give them just 2 minutes. And we're going to be very... Did you set me up for that, didn't you? We're going to be very... All right, I'll see if I can not break this again. Everybody's going to get just 2 minutes to answer, and then I'm going to give them the rather gentle bell. So it's going to have a feeling of moving pretty fast. They'll get 2 minutes each to answer the question, and then Corie and I are going to grill them, just like the debates. I'm Megan Kelly. She's that other guy that nobody remembers the name of. And we're going to give them as tough a time as we can, just to make this as lively a session as we can. And then we'll open it up to you guys to have some Q&A from the audience. So as they're going through this, be capturing some notes on what tough questions you would like to ask our panelists too. Any hockey fans here? 2 of you? 3 of you? Okay, so we picked the wrong device, but I'm going to go with it anyway. It's all I've got. So Wayne Gretzky famously said, you know, how come you're such a great hockey player, Wayne? I skate to where the puck's going. You've all heard that 1,000 times, but it's, you know, an interesting conversation. We've said at various different points throughout this event that it is great to reflect on what's happening in the industry today, but as entrepreneurs, your job is to get to the future first. That's what entrepreneurs do. So we're interested in predictions about what the future looks like so that you can have some clues and some nuggets, and you should be writing every one of these insights down and taking it away with you. This is the take-home value. Where is the puck going? Let's get our first 2 contestants up on here right away. We're going to hear from Mr. Ethan Fixel from the first evening and Dr. Kevin Purcell, Chief Data Scientist of Wild Fig. Come on up, gentlemen. Yes, thank you. Did you agree who's going to go first?
I can go first. You want?
Great. Ethan, just wait for me to break the hammer one more time.
Oh, boy. I'm nervous now.
So, Ethan.
Yes.
Where is the puck going? What's the future look like? Your 2 minutes begins now.
Do I punch him? No? Okay.
Not yet.
I'll just talk.
Later.
I think that we are coming into an age where producers are some of the most important people in the business, right? People who are buying these days, the millennials we're talking about, consumers, care about who is making the product and why that person is making the product, okay? And especially with social media, people are interacting with these people and getting a kick out of that. Sam Calagione of Dogfish Head, he stands at Great American Beer Fest and he signs autographs and he's like a rock star. And it's because he has been passionately making these culinary-inspired beers for 25 years. Charles Smith, the winemaker, is like the bad boy of wine, and people go crazy for him because he's authentic. It's real. The other thing is, another trend that's important in addition to the producers is that these producers have to be making stuff locally, and they have to actually be successful in their local markets in order to take it to the national level, right? People have to get behind them in their neighborhoods. So that's really important, I think. And the thing is, the people who are buying this stuff, you know, the millennials or whatever, and everybody, are really trying to see authenticity here, okay? We don't want personalities for the sake of personality. We don't want Don King making our vodka, okay? We want real creators and passionate people making this stuff because we can see through, you know, fake stuff, okay? And so I think as this goes on, I think we're going to see these two trends bubbling up to the top, and I think that it's really important that we sort of don't try to chase these micro trends that are like, oh, the next grapefruit IPA, the next, you know, whatever it is, the next unoaked wine that's going to be popular. We need to be focusing on the larger trends, which is just making good products and believing in those products.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yes.
Kevin, you're up.
First of all, I want to make sure that I'm the bad boy of data, just to get started. But I think in terms of trends, where the puck's going, I think in this industry, it's really not that much different than all industries in which we're going to see a revolution in the idea of how we gain our information, where our ideas come from, how we make decisions, and that's going to be, at least in my opinion, driven in a great degree by data. It's not going to be the only choice, but it is going to be driving this. If we look at what's going on out there in every industry, we see this explosion in data, both, you know, public industry sales, people are using their data more, but then there's also the operations side of it, the revolution of industrial IoT or the Internet of Things, where all the equipment we use, whether it's a pH meter or a production facility or a bottler, all these things are spitting out information and feeding it to us, or is feeding it into the ether. The idea is if we can leverage that information and use it to make good decisions, to make sound judgments. And, you know, I think the idea is we're seeing this revolution and the tools are changing and now it's about getting on the train and using those things because sooner or later all your competitors are going to be using it too. You know, and it impacts every aspect of business. It's not just about forecasting sales or where things are happening. It's also about human resources. It's about operations. It's about making sure your machines don't go down at that vital point. It's making sure that your supply chain and your distribution channels are up to date. I think there's, you know, in my mind, that's where things are going. And like I said, it's not going to replace, you know, the decision-making process or the way we choose the next flavor or the next product, but it is going to augment the way we run our business, the way we operate our business, and how we communicate and connect with our you know, buyers, with our you know, our demographics. And I think that's going to be the defining characteristic of at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Perfect. Corie has a question.
Why do we talk about millennials as if they are different? Are they really different? Does the data show that they're different? Or are they just young?
Who's that? That's me.
I don't know about data.
Yeah.
No, but everybody's talking about millennials. Are they really a different animal?
I think, you know, I think, yeah, of course they're a different animal. Every age, every demographic that grows up in a different period has a different slant on the world. So, yeah, I think they're unique and they have their own sort of view of the world and the way things should work, and that's defined by their time. And so in that, I think they are different. But I think there's also an element of the fact that they're younger, and that's a unique group of people that are more active, more vocal. And now we know more about what they think because, you know, social channels and social media is putting out that opinion. And it's much more, you know, it's much more accessible.
Ethan.
Yes.
You spoke a lot about authenticity.
Yes.
Can it be faked?
No.
Tell me more. What if I don't have an actual real story? Can I just make one up and get away with it?
It's a great question, and no. The answer is no. I thought there was going to be a second part. I was like, really? Are you
No, that's
asking
it.
me this?
It's nice and tight. It's simple.
It's no, because I think a lot of people get confused that if you come up with a story behind a crappy product, that's gonna help you. It's not gonna help you. If you also come up with a fake story behind a good product, that's also not going to help you, okay? I've talked about this with Corie before. It's really, the problem is that we can see through this stuff, okay? Anybody can, really. I mean, this is not a millennial thing. You really, if you look at a product and you hear a story that sounds ridiculous or you don't believe who is making that thing, it just won't sell. And so I'll give you an example of a good story, right? I mentioned Sam, I mentioned Charles Smith. Let's talk about Jeppe Jarnet Bjergso. Okay, he is a Danish beer maker, okay, and he's got a brewery called Evil Twin Brewing. And he's a gypsy brewer, but he works out of New York City. And he is a fascinating character, and he really is, he's not the bad boy of data, but he's the bad boy of beer, okay? And he is an awesome character, and he's real. He's legit. He was a former school teacher, and then he was like, you know what, F this. I'm going to go make some beer. And now he's this crazy dude who runs around the country making beer with all of these awesome producers. And he also talks all about cross-drinking. He says, the only reason I make the beer is so I can afford the wine. That was more like a creepy German man. He's Danish, but you get the idea. And he interacts.
They're very similar.
They're very similar. Same country. So he interacts with people on Twitter constantly, and he goads people if they talk, if they give a negative review, and it's all in this way that his fans understand and get. And it's all because he's real. He's not faking that. He's not making a persona. You can't do that to sell a product. You have to be who you are and believe in what you're making and be passionate about it.
Good. I've got a quick follow-up for Kevin, and I'd love it if you have one more too. Apple's in the news this morning because the FBI is trying to get them to give all of the data in smartphones to them. Where do we reach the point where we just ticked off about all this data being collected about us and there's a backlash?
A backlash. Well, how do you define a backlash, I guess, is my thought. In the Apple example, I think that, they provide a product just like anybody else, and their object is to create and produce the best product for their consumers. A product that's has a security weakness, which is on the minds of almost everybody, is probably a flawed business approach. So I think they have a point in defending their product. Their product's widely distributed. Millions and millions of people have these machines. If they break it and they make it open for everybody, then it's sort of a flawed thing. I think there's always this idea of the dark side of data, but I can tell you from the operational side of helping people leverage this, it's hard to do the evil things that you hear about in the news. The reality is we're having a hard time just projecting what sales are going to be next month and not adding that, but actually using the data to inform that. So I think in terms of the evil overlords of data, I think we're a little far off on that. But I do think that there's real value and there's merit, and I think there's a scale. I mean, at some point, yeah, there is a dark side, there is a dangerous aspect of all that information being known. But the reality is we're giving that information away most of the time. You have a phone, you have a free email account, you accept the idea for having those products free that your data is out there and that you don't own it anymore. So I think the key thing is about us being more sensible about how we give away that data and thoughtful about what we're doing and where we're giving it and where we're putting it.
Great. 20 seconds, Corie?
Is the dark side of data that it starts to run us instead of our creativity determining where we go, that we're chasing data instead of using it as a tool?
I think that's a great question. It's something that we at Wild Fig are really thoughtful about, because I think there is you guys especially, you're business owners, you're entrepreneurs, but you also have a creative aspect. There's a personality to success. And I mean, I can't tell someone how to do those kinds of things, but what I can do is help you make better, sound decisions based on the realities of your business. I don't make your business. I can't help you create a new product in the creative way. But I think that's where we specify things. We talk about something called augmented intelligence, where we're really interested in helping you make better decisions based on your data. We're helping you connect with this information about your consumers. And I mean, to me, I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that. Ultimately, the objective is not to be this really cool, crazy, tattooed, strange talking guy, but it's to create a great product that people love, and that creates a successful business. And you do that by making sure that your customers are getting what you want and learning from that experience. And if I can help you fail more quickly, fail more fruitfully, and learn from those experiences, it seems to me that the data is a good thing. It's not a creative destroyer, it's a creative creator.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Let's give these people a round of applause. Thank you, guys. And again, don't forget your questions. If you have a follow-up question you wish we'd asked, we'll get these guys back up as soon as we're done with the session. Two more speakers, Michael Pavone and David Schumann. Michael is CEO of Pavone Marketing Group and a specialist in marketing and packaging. And David is going to talk to us about Design 2. So, your 2 minutes, who's going first? Okay. Great. Your 2 minutes starts now. Where is the puck going?
Well, we're in a kind of an interesting position at CF Napa, since we do new product development and quite a bit of packaging and design marketing work within the alcoholic beverage category. And so we see trends actually before they even hit the market. So I actually know a little bit about what's going to be going out in 2016. One of the interesting things I think that we've heard about during this conference that's definitely not going to go away is what I like to call crossbreeding between what used to be siloed wine, beer, spirits, and cider, any alcoholic beverages. You see just this last year, we've worked on a number of products that are doing that even from a production standpoint. So we've developed a red wine package that actually is aged in barrels, which is typical, but with jalapenos and coffee, so flavoring. So borrowing from what you would traditionally see within the spirits category or maybe within beer. We've all seen beers that are aged in bourbon casks and being sold far more like wine. This last year, we launched Robert Mondavi's new red wine that's aged in bourbon barrels. So doing that, and that's actually carrying into the packaging as well. I think there's going to be quite a bit more disruptive packaging. Blending in no longer is enough. Standing out is definitely where you need to be, and you'll see a lot of that within the wine category that used to be very traditional bottles is now packaging themselves in custom glass, which was usually before this normally only seen within spirits. I think also just within the kind of the design category, you're seeing a lot of throwback brands and things that you would have typically seen more in spirits even coming into wine and far more lifestyle driven. Wine has been a category that's been quite dormant for quite a while, and now you're starting to see a lot more of the brand development with story building and things that you've traditionally seen in other categories.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent.
Michael?
You know, I think what I can add to this maybe is a broader thing. And interestingly enough, most of the folks here, I think, are doing a small craft, a small batch. They're creating new brands, and which is fantastic. As it was said earlier, you need to have a story of authenticity. We're hired a lot of times by really big companies that want to look like you guys. And we work with companies that span across the spectrum, like the biggest of companies. So we're working on a chocolate brand right now that's trying to come off as more small batch and craft. They're going to do stuff with the design to make it look like the papers, the textures, very, very like sort of homemade. There's a large manufacturer of seafood products that we're working with, and we're trying to make it look like two guys and a dog started their own fishing company and are doing this kind of craft, if you will, craft seafood, if that makes any sense. So it's really wild how what you guys are all doing is what the big guys are trying to emulate. In the alcoholic beverage category, hard sodas are like the new rage, right? So we're being looked at, companies are coming to us to help them create new brands. They're actually asking us to create a story because, quite frankly, they're really large companies and they don't have the two guys and a dog. So we are oftentimes, as marketers, trying to create this quote-unquote authenticity for them, and it's not easy. I mean, it comes down to the fact, like, you put the company name on the package because if people look at it, they might find out that, quite frankly, they're not a small two guys and a dog company. So it's a really kind of an interesting thing that we're seeing right now.
Great. Good starter. Corie?
David, you were in a position when somebody came to you with a wine that's made with jalapenos, and you did not stop them. Why?
So they've got a number of traditional wines already, I should say. This is not their only product. So they
You
can
did
afford
not
to
stop them.
You know, it's surprisingly good, and we've actually even working on a spear project now that's using used wine barrels to actually age their product. And I think that I personally find it quite exciting, the flavors that are starting to develop in some of the, not only just the wine category, but also spirits. Maybe just because I like spicy things, I didn't stop them. I'm kind of beating around the bush of answering your question. You know, it was shocking, and when they first came to us, which was early last year, we thought they were a little bit crazy. But they're starting to get a lot of traction with it, and they're different. And they're definitely not aiming their wine at every kind of consumer. They've got a very specific kind of consumer that's seeking something different. Millennials are, and specifically they're going after millennials, who are far less caught up on tradition. They're seeking different stories, different products. They're willing to take bigger risks and try different things, and they're not caught up in the traditions of what was in the past been really more of a European-driven business, you know, for the tradition of Bordeaux.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, and I'll ask you, Michael, but if you want to chime in on this, David. Is there a bigger insight here about why these millennials are seeking authenticity? What's happening in their lives, in the culture at large, that is making them want to go in that direction as opposed to the other direction? Why authenticity? Why does it matter?
they have spent their entire lives being inundated with every type of media and every type of medium that you can imagine. And because of that, they've been force-fed this. They're very non-trusting of traditional media. And let's face it, who can blame them? I mean, so much of what you read and see out there is fake. We live in an age, a digital age, where you could put people into photographs that weren't really there, and they're used to that. That's their norm, not their alt. So they have because they have the connection to technology. They can actually go and check on these stories. It's, at the fingertips, with Google, you can go onto the internet and find out anything about anyone, about the story. So they're seeking authenticity to make sure that, they're interested in real people. And they end up being far more Americana-driven than you might expect.
Michael, what's your take on this?
I think you nailed it. I think the fact that they're walking around with a computer in their pocket and can fact check absolutely everything makes it easier for them to find out if things are authentic. And I think that they were grown up. I mean, their parents maybe were a part of times when the big brands were talked to. The advertising said, go buy this, it'll make your life better. And like lemmings, I guess we listened. And but they don't have to. I mean, they really want to know what their friends think. They want to know, what their peers feel about a product, and if they feel good about a company. And I think that's really important. They do. You need to have a story, but they want to feel good about the companies that they quote unquote do business with.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're coming back to trust brands that are actually doing the right thing, which is the good news. The bad news is they don't trust anybody, do they?
Well, they're also quite experience-driven, so experiences matter to them far more than actual things. So you're seeing they lived through a very tough economic time, still are. Many of them are not as employed as they thought they were going to be, but they are willing to spend quite a bit of money, even on what we would consider maybe more premium or luxury products, as long as the experience is at a quality level that they want.
Do you have a question, Corie?
No.
I've got one very important question I need to ask you before you both leave as experts in design and packaging and so on. What's going to be the hot color next year? Come on, you're on camera.
I've always found answering these things a little dicey. Hot color.
It's going to be pink, isn't it? I'm thinking pink. I don't know why.
I'm amazed. So I've got 3 kids under the age of 13, and I will tell you that I never thought I'd see the day where my son, who's 10, would wear neon pink soccer shoes and think they're cool.
There you go.
And so I do think neons are on the rise. Orange has been a hot color for a while. I think we'll continue to see that. But for sure, neon, the 80s are back, but in a different way.
I guess so from my perspective, and again, we're talking about a span here of all food and beverage. One of the rules, cardinal rules, was you never use blue in food. It was just a thing. I don't know why. I don't even know if it made any sense, but something that everyone said. And now that color blue is popping up on a lot. And I think it has to do with just being fresh, or it's a color that maybe they just didn't see in food packaging. But that color, I'm not saying that's the hot color, change all your packaging to blue by any means, but it's actually being utilized more than I've ever seen before.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on. I'm sure you have lots of better questions than the ones we asked to those two when they come back. So John Hinman, please, founding partner of Hinman Carmichael, LLP, and Robert Lemon, founder of Lemon Beverages and Law. Quick question. Can you make the law interesting for 8 minutes?
We can try.
All right, good. So why don't you go first then, John? 2 minutes starts now.
All right, there's 3 things I'm looking to happen over the next year, the next 5 years. The first is an increase in technological innovation on the part of the regulators. We haven't really talked about it at this particular conference, but they're looking for common forms. One of the themes that you've heard here has been how difficult it is to comply with the laws of the 50 different states, which are 50 different countries. The regulators are actually addressing that, and I think we're going to see some real progress this year. NCSLA meets in June in Chicago, and the common forms are going to be the issue. With a common form and digital technology, you're going to find a terrific decrease in the cost of compliance. Number 2, you're going to see a corruption case this year. The Southern Glazers merger, the Charmer-Wirtz merger, the Kroger situation has embarrassed a lot of regulators. And I suspect that there's a corruption investigation undergoing right now that we're probably going to see break sometime in the course of the next year. Regulators do not like to be embarrassed. Number three, there's a number of First Amendment cases that are progressing right now through the court system. In California, in the Ninth Circuit, the Retail Digital Networks case, which applied a heightened standard of scrutiny to the regulatory restrictions on tied house relationships, in this case, advertising and retail premises. The Mark Anthony case in Texas, which invalidated the TABC restrictions on private labels on malt beverage products. These cases are all going up on appeal this year, and they're cases to watch. We're seeing First Amendment jurisprudence increase in this industry throughout the country.
Look at that. I didn't even need this bell. Fantastic 2-minute talking point. Great, follow up.
I see two big things coming in the next year or so. The first would be there's an awful lot of class action lawsuits pending against spirits and beer companies, not so much wine companies, but I think a lot of these might get decided during the next year or so, and it's not really clear where they're headed. The big one would be Tito and the handmade designation on that vodka label. There's about 9 separate lawsuits pending for that. So, you know, even if only 1 or 2 get thrown out, that still leaves an awful lot that might make some disruption and change. And I think this is really important, these class action lawsuits, because it will sketch out TTB's role and the government's role relative to the court system's role and private entities' role. And I personally feel like TTB should do a little more, be a little more assertive in this area, and not so much let the courts handle it. So, you know, there's whiskey cases, there's the vodka case, there's a lot of beer cases about people more or less faking authenticity, and plaintiff lawyers going after that. So watch and see that, how it plays out. And then the second thing I think is a big trend, or where the puck is going in the next year or so, is TTB has said a few times on the federal side that they're rewriting parts 4, 5, and 7 of the federal regulations. And this could be really important. All I really know about it is TTB says they're rewriting it, they've been working on it for a long time, and it's going to be something like 500 pages. And in my view, even if they try to keep things a lot the same, I think John can attest, anytime you mess with words, if your intention is to be the same, it doesn't mean it will be the same, just by virtue
Be careful what you ask for, you might get it.
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting, and subtly or not so subtly, the rules might shift somewhat during the course of that rewrite.
Fantastic.
So when people go bad in the liquor business, what's the thing that they're most likely to do that's bad?
This is an example right here.
Cross over the tiers in a corrupt fashion where you own an interest in one tier and another tier. The original purpose of the tied house laws was to prevent corruption. You're going to see today, because of cross-investment in the industry, a lot of folks try to be in both the retail tier and on the production supply tier at the same time. That is, in fact, prohibited in the United States. It is a common problem. The Italy case in New York is probably the single best example of a current example of this particular phenomena, where the remedy was a $500,000 fine, being shut down for 6 months, and an order of divestiture for owning wineries in Italy and restaurants in New York. Those are the kind of things that you're going to be seeing more of. We had divestiture orders in California for wineries and owning too many restaurants. The tied house laws are alive and well because their principal purpose is to prevent control by one tier of another tier. That's not going away.
Is that really a problem? I mean, is that just a regulatory fact, and there isn't actually? I'm trying to think of
Our
how
industry was founded at the end of Prohibition to solve the problems that created Prohibition in the first place. The pre-Prohibition era featured tied house laws, which controlled by the distillers and the brewers of the pubs. You'll still see it in the UK and in Europe. Yes, it was 80 years ago, or in many cases almost 100 years ago, but the fact of the matter is that legacy remains with us today, which is control of retail outlets by the production tier. And that's the reason the regulators exist. That's their primary mission, is to prevent that, which is why you're going to see cases involving corruption.
Robert, question for you. Yesterday, somebody came up to me in the workshop and said, you know, I'm trying to do all kinds of creative things with my brands, but these laws are just handcuffs. I can't get out of them. I'm stuck. Do creative entrepreneurs need more creative legal advice, or is that a slippery slope?
Well, the advice is helpful, but I would just say the more barriers and complexity, it creates opportunity to sort of work around that stuff and find a way. I'm trying to think, John, do you have a good example?
Yeah, let me get into this. We have a lot of clients that face unique problems in investment and other things. You can find mechanisms to create corporate structures that don't implicate the tied house laws, for example, but still permit the investment structure that you're looking for. Yes, creative legal advice is exceptionally important.
Fantastic.
I mean, one example I can think of is, I believe 10 or 15 years ago, it was pretty taboo to have words like lemonade and root beer and soda on alcohol beverages. Government entities said, oh, it's very confusing, or maybe iced tea even. But that's all gone away. Somebody worked around those prior strictures and found a nice little category, or not so little category, for themselves.
Great, so there's hope. So if you're sitting there right now with a lawyer who's telling you, no, we can't do that, no, we can't do that, no, we can't do that, maybe you should give one of these guys a call and get a little bit more creative.
Or any of our other colleagues. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of room within the current regulations to market, produce, and sell your product in creative and profitable ways.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's get our next. That was excellent. Thank you. So our final two, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions. We're going to have James Dowd. I think you go by Jim, right? Yeah. Yeah. And Jim is the Chief Executive Officer of North Capital, so we're going to talk about money. And Keith Merklin, General Manager of Live Oak Bank, Craft Beverage Division. We'll be really interested to see where you take this. Where is the puck going in the money world and this business?
Want me to start? Well, you know, we've seen tremendous growth, and that's easy answer. I do believe things are going to continue to grow. The challenge I see from a banking side is, with this growth, you know, as a bank that's jumped into this space, you know, of lending to breweries and distilleries and wineries, you know, will other banks follow? And what I worry about is when banks get involved and when they all copy, which is kind of what we do, if one bank's having success, the other ones tend to join it. It brings in a ton of money to these industries. And what I don't like about that is it will help grow these industries, but are we going to get the wrong type of owners trying to come into these spaces? And I think what we've seen over the last 10 years and longer is it's really about the owner, and it's really about the product. And, you know, as I get a call a day from somebody wanting to start a brewery, you know, I get concerned because I talk to these guys about their plan and their vision, and they haven't really thought it out. It's become kind of this cool thing to do, is to own a brewery. And I have to tell them, you know, it starts with the product, and then you got to build the team, and then you got to have the people around you. But, you know, going back to all the money that's sitting on these bank sidelines and with investors and other people in the space, you know, if that money starts flooding in here, are we going to get the wrong guys coming in here trying to build, you know, these breweries? And then, you know, ultimately we will have a hiccup. I mean, things have gone very well over the last 5 years, but if there is one bump in the road, you know, and all this money has come crashing in, I mean, I don't want to compare it to the home lending challenges we had. It will cause some challenges for these guys that aren't in it for the right reason. You know, so I worry about that. You know, I really want to work with the right people that are in it and dedicated to building the right brand and have the right vision to growing a successful small business.
Great, good answer, thank you.
Well, I'm kind of struck by, in kind of wandering the floor yesterday, how similar in some ways what's happening in your industry is to what's happened in the securities business. How many people here have a really high regard for Wall Street? A lot of people? Yeah. No, not even one hand. That kind of sums up what's going on in the securities business. There's a lack of trust. There is so much distrust, in fact, that an entire presidential campaign is kind of focused on reforming and revising Wall Street is a centerpiece of that campaign. And I think what's happening is that this creative destruction that's going on in Wall Street with new types of fundraising occurring online, changes in securities laws that have happened that have changed, kind of age-old practices that have been in place for 80 years, are completely changing the way that people are raising money through securities offerings. So you've got the banking on the one hand, and you have sales of equity and sales of securities to individuals and to institutional investors on the other hand. And that process is completely changed and is being disrupted. And I think that's the biggest single change that will affect your business with respect to non-traditional forms of financing, is that you're going to see the sort of the non-banked market, the non-securities firm market, non-Wall Street market providing financing. And my prediction is that in 2016 or 2017 at the latest, you're going to see a new upstart brand, either probably a brewery or a beer company, but possibly in the spirits business, that will do its entire financing through alternative sources of financing, product pre-sales, crowdfunding, direct offerings to the public, to its clients. And that authenticity that everybody talks about will extend to raising money as well.
Right at zero, you stop talking. I'm going to ring it anyway. Great, fantastic. Corie, you have a...
When you say the wrong kind of people, what's a wrong person? What do they look like? How do they act? And how do we recognize them?
Well, I work with 300 people, and I get these kids. I shouldn't call them kids, but they're out of college. They walk up and they're like, "Keith, I want to start a brewery." And it's just funny to me. This is a coworker, right, that does it because they think it's cool and they think it's easy, and they don't realize that it costs $500,000 to $700,000 to start one of these businesses, and that you don't get paid for the first 3 years because every penny you make is going right back into this business, and you don't have an idea of how to any recipes. You get into it because it's trendy and it's what's going on out there, and unfortunately we're seeing it all the time with our with how we brand our bank and specialize in these industries. We get a call a day on somebody wanting to start up, and it's really a challenge trying to find somebody who's thought this out, and they can tell you where they want to be 2 years, 3 years, and understands the pain it's going to be to get rolling.
A follow-up question on that. Should there be some sort of informal code then to allow money people to identify who are the people who are doing this for the right reasons and who aren't, so that we don't create this inflated bubble that bursts and causes chaos for everybody in this room 3 years from now?
Well, there technically is. It is how banks are audited and regulated, but it's not, you can't keep up with it. You see what happens with banks, and when they get in trouble, they dive in and they just keep going with it because it becomes very profitable initially. So I wish there was different regulation, but then working for a bank that's heavily regulated, we understand that we want to have a little more freedom too. So it's kind of a tough place for the regulators to play.
So what's your take on Jim's prognosis that alternative methods of financing like crowdfunding and so on are going to change that dynamic completely, and 3 years from now we'll be on stage talking about a very different way to fund growth?
I agree. I see it, and I talk to people on the investor side, on the equity side all the time. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a ton of money, not just on the bank balance sheets, but both private and with investors out there. We have 200 non-bank lenders today offering financing of some sort to small businesses. And right now they're generalists and they're covering all businesses, but sooner or later they're going to realize if we get niche and focus on a handful of industries, and one of them could be the beverage space, they're going to start throwing this money in different forms, whether it's crowd financing or angel financing or investor financing. And it could be exactly what we're talking about.
The price of getting into the alcoholic beverage craft business, up, down? Is the technology pushing the price down of entry, or is the popularity pushing it up?
The popularity is pushing it up. The demand for, especially in the distillery, cider and the beer space, is through the roof for this stainless steel. And the cost is going up, and there's a 6-month lead time in this equipment. And everybody's, it's, like I said, somebody asked me the other day what it costs to do a startup brewery, and I said it's going to be anywhere from $400,000 to $1 million, and they were blown away, just because of the insane costs of this equipment.
Question for either of you can answer this. It's really a follow-up on that. We've seen the so-called sharing economy take off in different parts of the economy, Airbnb and Uber being 2 examples. Do you see, given the high costs and it's going up, do you see that as a possible model to be played out in this industry, where we're sharing stills and tons? And
I'm sure it will be. I mean, in almost every market that we see, there's kind of the initial phase is to kind of have the entrepreneurs starting their own companies, and then somebody, it sort of, markets emerge to kind of address the issues that you identified, the high costs. And I would also say, I mean, I don't know if I would entirely agree with your answer as far as the cost of entry. I mean, I think, locally that may be true, but if you think about it contextually, I mean, there are businesses being started today that 10 years ago could never have been started. I mean, people who are starting, and I think it's a fact that these new brands and new microbreweries and sort of these bespoke distilleries exist, and they probably couldn't have existed before because the equipment wasn't available, the financing wasn't available, the market wasn't really available. So I think that you will see more of that. You will see a developing of a sharing of economy, and there may be a little bit of ego attached with people wanting to get into this business, because if you can't have your own brewery, what's the next best thing? It's to own a piece of somebody else's.
Yeah, great. Let's leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting. We have one more pair, which I forgot. Sorry, gentlemen. W.R. Tisch, who goes by Bill. Tisch. Managing editor of Beverage Media Group. And Dr. Damian Wilson, PhD in a fascinating subject, I won't tell you what, chair of the Wine Business Education, Sonoma State University Wine Business Institute. Which one of you fellas is going to go first?
Okay, great. I have a bit of a cheat sheet here. I come from media and looking mostly at the trade, but I also do a lot of events, so I get to interact with consumers a lot. And one thing I see happening this year is that the word craft, we're not going to be using it the same way in another year or so. I think it's going to sort of fall flat. It's going to get blown up with one of those, with the Tito's suit or something like that. And it's going to backfire, because if, for example, if Tito's wins and they can keep calling themselves handmade, then we can say cynically, well, you can't trust anything on the label. Or if they lose, then you still can't trust the next guy that says craft or handmade. So I'm a little worried about people not accepting and appreciating the word craft, which is terrifying to a lot of people in this room probably, because you really do make craft products. So you just have to be aware of that. I think in its place, we will see an advantage for brands and producers that make an extra effort for transparency of their ingredients, their alcohol, their approach, who they think they are, who they think they are for. And I think that that's the sort of the new authenticity, is more about transparency than saying we're authentic, showing that you're authentic. I also think that in price ranges, the $12 to $20 range, especially in wine, is becoming the new good standard. There is a lot of really good wine out there for $12 to $20, and I think people who spend less on wine are willing to spend up when they want to, and I think people who are used to saying, I buy good wine, are happy to spend $15 and say, I still buy good wine. So I see that being a very important part of the market, and as much as I'm afraid of it, I think these red blends are the Merlot or the Shiraz of this generation. They taste good, people drink them, they keep drinking them, they keep buying them, people keep making them.
Perfect. Damien.
Thanks, Mark. Look, I wanted to conclude with the whole idea that we are going where the puck is going to be, and I wanted to give producers sitting in the audience here something that they can leave with an idea about where to go. The craft beer industry has its hipsters. The spirits industry are certainly the volume shifters. Cider are the new ifters. And the wine sector has to cut loose its drifters. So we've got this situation where we're looking at this concept of authenticity, and we're travelling in this, or we're floating along on this sea of change, and we're struggling to navigate our way to paradise and the island of success, which is a real challenge for us. I'm trying to figure out where everything's going. I've heard a lot about millennials and the concept of authenticity, and I'm less convinced about this concept. It's not that I don't think it's important, but I think from our lens, looking at authenticity, it's really important talking about the product, its concepts, and depth of information. And for the millennials, it's a badge of something which is individualistic for a generation which is absolutely, as we've heard before, overwhelmed with information. So they're trying to stick out in their sea of knowledge, and that's something they can adhere to. We look at millennials, we don't understand them, we don't know enough about them, and we need to be more critical of the data that we're getting hold of. The data that we're using, if we're looking at it from our own perspective, we don't tend to be as judgmental as we really should be. And I think we need to learn to judge or develop a bit more brand character. This idea of character is what you do when people aren't looking. And if you look on social media, which millennials know particularly well and use really well, and we're not doing it as well as we should be, we will put up a lot of images of consumers, and particularly millennials, with us in our location. But how do they treat our brand when we're not there? Work on your brand character and develop that, and I think that's the way forward to take advantage of the opportunities of the millennial generation.
Thank you.
As millennials age, what are they going to grow up to be?
I'm scared about this concept because I heard this in 1996 in Australia with Strategy 2025. We know how well that's gone for Australia. I heard an old man in a suit standing up talking about how Australia was going to double production over, and they even went greater than that. And I heard the same thing from Fred Franzier about 2 weeks ago, repeating the same mistakes that Australia made. Talking all about production, not about consumption. How are we going to attract people into the category? And we're not doing that. The assumption was they'll get into wine, for example, when they grow up. And if we assume that instead of embracing their interests and identifying what their motivations are, I think that's the key mistake. We can't just wait for this generation to grow up, because as baby boomers age, the income coming into the sector is going to disappear and has to be replaced somewhere. And millennials certainly don't start with craft. They have to work their way up to it. We have to attract them and help them move through the category, whether it's craft beer, whether it's spirits, whether it's cider, or whether it's wine. And unless we can actually figure out a way to embrace them and understand their motivations, we're not going to be able to do that effectively.
Let me ask you both a question about the next time, 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about Generation Z, right? We'll have moved on from the millennial conversation. We'll be obsessing about this new generation. Typically, most generations will do something quite counter to the one that preceded. What does it look like then? What does a counter Gen Z drinker look like if it's the opposite or different to what we have today? Any prognosis?
My only prognosis is that it's going to be the next generation is going to be even more digitally wired, and I think the challenge for brands is they used to say you have to get noticed, and now you have to get noticed and remembered, and it's harder. We all know how many brands are out there. I don't know what the Generation Z kid is going to be like, but I have 2 millennials, and I think that they are very they're not easily swayed to be loyal, but they are easily swayed to try new things. So they're going to have their own experiences and try their new products. And, we probably don't know the wild card from 5 years from now. If there is a celebrity out there who suddenly gets into cider, we will be talking differently about cider. And all the cider makers are going to be smiling. If we don't know what that wild card is, or if there is some kind of scandal with some additives in some kind of whiskey, then who knows what could happen. Or if there's a new flavor that no one ever thought of in vodka, who knows, flavored vodka could be back. I think I've been in this business only long enough to know that predicting is just a crapshoot. So
Yeah.
it's
Damien,
fun, though.
Anything to say about Z?
I wanted to touch on what Tish was saying as well. See, social media, the new generation is so tech savvy. I mean, I have to teach social media, and I can tell you, I didn't exactly grow up with it. These are the experts in the field, so it's a real challenge for us. Getting them, connecting with them effectively through social media, we've got to learn how it works, because I saw yesterday in Ad Age the projection by marketers is they were going to double their expenditure in social in the next 5 years. And yet few people can actually, they know how to get any sort of measures for ROI on it. So, you know, I mean, we're kind of flying blindly, knowing we can see we've got rock and roll, we know how to use it, we know what it is, we just have no idea how to use it and how people are using it effectively. The new generation, ironically, they're actually more receptive to a lot of these, not so much email spam and the like, but they're receptive to messages from businesses. They're not as skeptical as us, but they will drop messages like a hot potato if those messages aren't relevant for them. So you've got this situation where you kind of, you know, you're approaching someone new, you're Gen Z, sorry, I use Z, it's an Australian thing, Z. Gen Z, they are likely to be receptive to an approach. But as soon as they think you're trying to sell them, put on false authenticity or whatever it might be, I think you've missed the boat, and they will not come back to you. You get a one-hit shot. If you get it right, you've got it nailed, and you've got a customer who is both receptive and interactive with you. But if you get it wrong, you don't get a second chance.
Great. Fantastic. Well, let's leave it there and open up to the audience. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Okay, so it's your turn. We've got mics in both aisles here. I'm sure we left a lot of questions unasked, so let's get some really juicy ones for anybody that was up on stage here is prepared to answer your questions. Who's got one? Nice, punchy, provocative ones. Yes, right there.
I'll give it a shot. I think
Thank you.
in terms of the millennial and this idea of it's different, right? I'm thinking that maybe it's more about it's really the same. And I have a millennial daughter as well. And we were having dinner about a month ago with my brother, who's at the beginning of the baby boom generation, and I'm kind of at the end of the baby boom generation. And we kind of came to the conclusion that, man, this generation is a lot like the 60s. And, you know, and I'm thinking also about, from a consumption perspective, how when we were growing up, we kind of went across categories too. We drank, you know, we started with fruity beverages with vodka or Boone's Farm or Andy Greensprings and beer. And I just kind of throw it out there that maybe we can reflect back on history a little bit and kind of where we came from to make decisions around addressing this millennial group and kind of where we're going. So what's old is new again, or what have you.
What are I mean, big data telling us anything about this issue, that actually there's a returning to some key trends here that were, you know, at large in the 60s and 70s?
I can't speak so much to the revival, but I do think that obviously the 60s was defined by certain identities, and I think that some of the other speakers spoke to it. I think the millennial is been immersed in social for so long that, you know, they're forced to try to create identity, and that's why they identify with, you know, unique brands and unique characters, and I think they're always looking to define themselves and push themselves out from the pack.
Yeah.
And because that's so easy to observe by their peers through social, that's what just makes sense to them. That's their new competitive landscape, you know. Whereas my generation was more about being in the clique or being in the pack, I think. And I do think there's an oscillation there. But I think, you know, the last set of speakers really spoke to the idea that, you know, I think leveraging social, which is the medium of this discussion, is the way. I mean, that's in terms of data, that's what we can do. I mean, they put this data out there. It's this amazing resource. I mean, we spoke a little bit about how sure they are about what they're sharing, but the reality is they are sharing it. They're sharing it from a very beginning, you know, of their lives and pushing it through. And I think the key is to use that, listen to what they're saying, listen to that conversation, leverage the, you know, data analysis to tell you that, and you'll basically shorten the distance between, you know, you and your consumer. And I don't think that's ever a bad thing.
Great. So you two great lawyers, two great money people. This is your chance. Ask them those tricky legal questions you've got or money questions you have. Yep, right behind you there.
Hi, this is a question for John. Yesterday during the public policy session, it was really interesting to hear you talk about the impact of Justice Scalia's passing on future decisions following Granholm. And I was wondering, did the Granholm decision break out on party lines? And if so, will the nomination of a new justice, is that going to have an impact on things like direct-to-trade shipping or retail shipping?
No one knows what the new Supreme Court's going to look like until there's a nominee that's finally approved, until the presidential election is over. So it's really hard to prognosticate exactly what's going to happen in the future. I will say this, Scalia was a voice of conservatism in the issue of alcohol. And whatever new justice takes his place is going to have a different view. So we can look forward to equal treatment, I believe, for all three beverage types. That's a big issue today, whether it's spirits, wine, or beer. They're treated differently in the regulations, but they're being consumed in equal fashion throughout the country. So we're talking about tax equivalency. We're talking about equivalency in the ability to have routes to market. And I think we're going to see a lot of changes in that particular area. But getting a case to the Supreme Court takes years. And there's no cases in the pipeline right now that are going to impact anything in the next 5 years.
Great question, great answer. Thank you. Others?
I actually have something to say.
Okay.
I'm put in this millennial category, and so everybody always talks about them and how they're so unpredictable. And a couple of things. One, I think actually Generation Z, there's an element of digital detox that's happening right now. I live in San Francisco, the most plugged in place on the planet where everybody walks around and stares at their phone, but it's actually kind of shifting. And you spend probably more concentrated times on your phone, but then there's also this element of, I can't tell you how many parties, events, conferences, et cetera, where you check your phone at the door. And there's this whole element of authenticity that everybody talks about. And that's in this kind of craft movement. If people want to go and hear a story, they might want to read it on their phone, but going to meet the person and talking to that person. So I actually think that there's something interesting in that Generation Z, which is a little scary because all this work has been put into social media and social and digital, and now we're kind of like, well, no, never mind, and we want to go backwards. So I think that's a little bit scary on that end. And I don't know, I think that the millennials, which is basically anybody young, it feels like, they get put in this category of being unpredictable, but I actually think the market is unpredictable. I mean, I think a lot of baby boomers are unpredictable. When you go into the wine aisles and people like browsing and looking and wanting new labels, it's not all young people that are doing that. I mean, a lot of my friends have the beer that they like. They go and wait in line for 7 hours for a Pliny the Elder beer. Like, there's an element of loyalty that's actually there somewhere. So anyway, just as a, I just kind of wanted to throw
Well, just as a general rule, you know, for all of these trends that you've been hit with from the stage here and probably in all the different workshops, you have to acknowledge that a challenger brand, one of the things they're going to be doing is trying to be counter-trend. If you want to stand out, you want to be different, you want to punch above your weight, doing something that is going in the opposite direction than the way the world is going can be an incredibly valuable strategy to jump out if it feels true and authentic to who you are and what you're trying to do in the world, as opposed to just jumping on a trend. Any others? Money question. Yes. Question there.
That sort of ties into my question a little bit, which is directed to the packaging and design gurus up there, which is we've been having a lot of conversation, of course, about standing out, and I love that call out as one of the key trends, but we've also been talking about premiumization. And traditionally, the spirits category, of course, has had much more leeway in terms of packaging, innovation, et cetera. Wine has been the most constricted. So what do you foresee in the wine category that would count as standing out in terms of packaging, but also premiumization as we go forward?
Would you mind both of you standing up and facing the audience so we can see the whites of your eyes?
I would say that just about every project we're working on now, that's a consideration. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but we're seeing far more demand for custom structure, custom glass within the wine category. And when we're working within a price point, a span in wine, we're always talking about trying to design up with about $10 in perception. The reason for that is that retailers are often discounting in order to attract consumers, and so by doing so, you're building in value. Essentially, the trick is, of course, not to overpromise kind of the quality of the wine itself. But you know, the wine category is slow moving for premiumization, and there's always been the gold foils and the sparkly things. But I'm doing a presentation a little bit later today where I'm going to show some examples of things that were very countercultural within their price point category. They stood out and they had a cleverness to them. And bringing that story forward, it was a way to show premiumness without having to do kind of the traditional cues. I just wanted to touch on something we talked about a little bit earlier with the millennials and the desire to go back to something that's a little bit more analog. We've been trying some new things that actually wasn't one of my ideas. I bought a watch last year from, I don't know if anyone's heard about Shinola. They're out of Detroit. Incredible brand, very authentic, great story, high quality watches. When you get a Shinola watch, they write you a handwritten thank you letter. I got a wallet just a few months ago, same thing, and actually from the actual owner of the company, he hand wrote his phone number down, said give me a call, let me know what you think. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Those are the kind of strategies we're seeing with millennials working really well.
Yeah, I really can't add anything more than what he said to the premium side. Obviously, it's all about the glass and all that. I think that's sort of been, I'll say, somewhat inundated. What I am seeing, or what we're seeing on it from a trends perspective, I'll say in the wine category is sort of on the lower tier. We're seeing Tetra Paks. I mean, we're seeing the box stuff, obviously, that's obvious, but I mean, who thought that you would ever see that? I think that's an interesting place that we're going. I think also in packaging in general, people are trying to figure out how they can stand out. There's a water bottle company, or water company called Oohoo, that the bottle itself is edible. So you can actually eat the bottle when you're done drinking the water. So, and we're seeing boxed water, like water sold now in milk cartons, because again, that's better for you, better for the environment and everything else. So I think there's a lot of play in a lot of areas. Premium side, I mean, that's your wheelhouse. That's you nailed it. So
let me ask you both a question. 3 years from now, are we going to see premium 4-pack cans of wine?
We're already working on them.
You're already working on it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and the Tetra is going to be something you'll see a lot more of, and wine and bags. Black box has been around forever. Very high price point for a wine in the box, and there's a lot of people chasing that.
Great. Question.
On packaging, great point, but also I think on laser marketing to your target audience. In target audience, as an exception, in wine, we have a product directly, specifically targeted to the Black Ops, Special Forces of our military. And it works brilliantly, really having a lot of fun with it. We're going towards farmers. We have a farm product that's only really geared towards farmers. I think even at a national level, you can really design a very targeted market audience, whether you're talking about school teachers or the medical profession. I think that opportunity really hasn't been very well attended yet.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Is it for me?
Yeah, or the marketing side. I mean, I think you nailed it. I think being laser focused is really hard to do. Everybody wants to be all things to all people. I talk about. Everybody wants to be all things to all people, but I think you're dead right. I mean, if you find a niche and you can really focus on that niche, I think you have all the opportunity in the world. I think the really smart marketers out there are doing that. They're figuring out. I love the idea of doing the thing with the military. I mean, it's really it's funny though, because the bigger the company, the harder it is for them to think that way, because they really try to be all things to all people. But I mean, I think that's brilliant. And the other thing too is simply with the fragmentation of media. I'm old, so I remember when you could buy 3 network TV, 3 TV networks and cover 90% of the population, right? So those days are well gone, and with the proliferation and the fragmentation of media, you have to be focused. You have to know the consumer journey. You have to understand how they're digesting their media and what they're looking at. Because if you don't, I mean, you're just going to be just lost out there. So I think that's, I mean, what you're saying is, I think, is brilliant.
Okay, one more question. This will be the last one, all the way in the back there. And then we'll wrap this thing up.
Thank you. As you know, for wine and distilled spirits, there are limited container sizes 750 milliliter for wine, etc. Have you found in the packaging design department, have those limitations restricted your creativity, or have you always been able to meet your clients' needs and not really have to worry about those restrictions?
It's been more about, we've always, you have to work within, those are government regulations, so you're not going to change I mean, you can spend your time and treasure against that. What we tend to do is, how can you make the format look different? You're seeing a lot of this in the bag in the box. Instead of just the traditional rectangle, doing something that's tall and thin, or there's a couple wine brands out now that are shaped like purses. All kinds of things that to allow you to stand out within that space are completely different. I think you're going to see far more of that. There's been wines in clay casts, the Chardonnay, that's, I forget the brand name now right off the top of my head, but there's all sorts of different containers being used within that volume space, and I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Great. Michael's got.
I'll add like one little piece to that, and this isn't so much in the wine category, but just I think packaging overall. I think it's funny, we talked about authenticity and having a story. I think having a story is the key thing, so you can stay focused on that target. You can be right down their channel as far as social media. We saw, like in the beer business, we saw Vortex bottles. We saw like climate packaging. To me, these are places, or these are brands that are looking for a gimmick. They're looking for something because they don't have anything. They're too wide and broad and lost. So I think the more you can kind of, with your packaging, let's face it, a lot of people can't afford to do much more quote unquote marketing other than the package, right? That's like ground zero for the brand. So you have to do a lot with it. And I think that's your opportunity to, again, I keep saying authentic, but tell your story. And I think the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be.
Great. Okay. Well, Corie, would you like to offer any closing remarks?
As a journalist, just taking it all in this last couple of days, it's been really interesting to notice what hasn't been spoken. And it's sort of, I keep wondering where's the dialogue about the role of beverages in the larger food movement? What you guys are doing is set within a larger context of a huge revolution that's happening in what we consume and how we consume it. And there's an opportunity to be associated with something that's huge and happening, and I'm looking for that connection to be made with what you guys are doing, and I think there's an opportunity there for thinking a little bit larger about where you guys fit into the business of consumption.
Great. So fantastic. Thank you all for staying for this session. I'll just give you just top-of-mind headlines for you to take home with you that's at least on my mental checklist. One is the importance of getting your story straight and not chasing gimmicks, because it will be inauthentic and won't work for this new audience that prizes that above anything else, given the absolute cratering of trust that's happening in the world. There are radically different funding models out there that are available to people, to you, that don't require you to necessarily go to a bank, and that's really interesting. I think there's going to be a complete revolution in how we think about peer-to-peer lending in this space going forward, and possibly crowd-sharing models. Packaging innovation is coming. It sounds like this wines can. So, Doug, I think you asked for that from the main stage on the first day. Whole Foods buyer ready to take some of that stuff if it's available. What else did we learn? I think that's a good enough list for me. So I'd love to hear what you took out of that at the end. If you want to come up and have a conversation, keep this dialogue going. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. Really enjoyed doing this session. I'd like to get George back on stage to close it.
Thank you guys very much. Yeah, I just want to give Mark and Corie another great round of applause. You guys did a fantastic job. The speakers, it was really fun. I was a little skeptical when our conference team pitched me on this idea, and you guys did a great job. So where's Chris and Sophie? I just want to, there's Sophie, and where's Chris? Chris is over there. Thank you guys, very good. This was fantastic interactive session. Thanks to everyone for being here. We've got a couple of more workshops and a round with the TTB this afternoon, or yeah, I guess it starts at 12:30 to 1:30. The taste room, or the exhibit floor, is going to open in just a few minutes. So if you haven't been down there, if you've got some more conversations to have, I definitely encourage you to go down there and visit with our exhibitors. But mainly, I just want to thank everyone for being here. first annual USBevX. A first-year show is always a little bit of a challenge, but I will tell you that it was just super impressive to me, and we look forward to doing it again next year. We'll be sending those save the dates out very soon. So thanks, everyone, for being here.